The other thing before I start is, for those who wish to know, I was chopping up firewood yesterday and I had an argument with a piece of wood, or my nose did at least, and the piece of wood won in one sense. Hence why I have a little badge across. Usually in my presidential address, I explore a common theme at a local, national and international level. However, here we are facing a general election in just under 4 weeks' time, and we're also 5 weeks on from our weekend of Waymark 19. So I want to major on this national situation and connect it to some threads from Waymark and diocesan life as a whole. There's slightly less, therefore, on international this time. I make these comments mindful of Bishop Sarah's really helpful and honest reflections on her first 6 months as Bishop of Jarrow and the stark financial realities presented in our budget presentation earlier. Brenda from Bristol became briefly famous in 2017 because of her line, "You're joking, not another one." That was in response to the announcement of Theresa May calling an election. Now, I haven't seen any journalist fine Brenda for a comment on yet another one in December 2019. The Fixed Term Parliament Act is meant to give us security around 5-year terms for Parliament and government. Since it came into force, this is our 3rd general election. It has clearly not worked and needs a very serious look at once we have a new government. But we are all less surprised by this election, as it has been touted as a possibility for several months and has seemed inevitable ever since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. The hope is that it will produce a clear majority for one party and thus produce a secure and stable government that can last 5 years. The underlying fear, of course, is that it will resolve nothing, produce another hung parliament, and lead to continued uncertainty. Continued uncertainty is probably the most damaging situation for the country as a whole. If the outcome of the election is a hung parliament, then I believe all MPs will need to consider very carefully indeed how they can behave differently from the way they have done so over the past 3 years. They will have to consider better ways of listening to one another and working together to find a way forward. A repeat of the behaviour patterns would be disastrous for us all. This would be far from easy because the nature of a general election campaign means all leaders talk up their hopes and convictions about winning and tend to rule out any ideas of collaborative working. Pacts don't exist before. Surprisingly, sometimes they have to afterwards. Therefore, in a hung parliament, there would need to be a swift refocusing where the collaboration everyone would know was required would be established. Now, no general election is, of course, a joking matter. It is a serious moment for our nation and for each constituency. Each MP has local responsibilities to serve the entire population of that constituency, regardless of people's personal voting preferences. It is naturally much easier to praise or blame a sitting MP for how well or not they have served the local people. It is harder to make an assessment on each candidate's potential to do so. Most people decide how to vote based on the party they represent and its policies. However, I want to encourage us all to look carefully at the credentials of all those who stand. Do they appear to have the capacity to serve as an MP? What values do they stand for? Integrity, service rather than personal power, care for the poorest, the ability to listen, and honesty all seem critical. It remains the case that hustings are a good way of listening to the various candidates and assessing not only their policies, but also their character and capacity. So I want to encourage every parish to explore working with our ecumenical and other faith colleagues in seeking to host hustings in each constituency. Then, of course, we all have to take some responsibility for trying to work through the published manifesto policies of each party and determine which we believe will serve the nation best. It is a general election, not a Brexit election. So whilst the question of remain or leave, and with or without a deal, are bound to be a central focus of debate and thinking, we all need to look at the wider issues as well. What vision for the nation and our society is being presented? Does it appear to be one which is good for all people? Is it one which sees us playing our full part in the wider world with all its needs, not least that relating to climate change? Specific policies in areas like education, health and social care, welfare, environment, employment, migration, security, crime, defence, foreign relations, trade and overseas aid all matter. Each party should have something clear and coherent to say on all of these. How are they encouraging business in all sectors? What are they saying about agriculture, fisheries and food? Are their policies seeking to protect and lift up the poorest and most vulnerable in our society? Do they remain committed to overseas aid at 0.7% of GDP? Is there clear commitment to the wise defence of the nation? Will these be backed by sound financial judgment on income, expenditure, borrowing and investment? There is a long string of questions to ask. We may well find we agree with one party on some matters and another on others. There then becomes the choice of balance between the differing views. From a Christian perspective, some questions of policy surely must always remain central, though you might reach different conclusions about which policy will work best. But these are the questions. How are the poorest and most vulnerable being protected, cared for, and lifted up? Do these policies treat all people and nations as truly valuable, made in God's image and loved by Him? Are these policies caring for the environment and all of God's creation? Will these policies protect and promote people's freedoms, especially freedom of worship? Do these policies promote social cohesion, community, integration, and regeneration? Do the policies promote peace in our world? We each have to reach our conclusions, not based on what is best for me and mine, but what is best for all, even if that might mean I am slightly worse off. Sharing my wealth through wise taxation might be more reflective of kingdom ways than holding on to more of my own. Each of us has to decide prayerfully and thoughtfully. Then we have to take action and vote ourselves and encourage our family, friends, neighbours and colleagues to also exercise their responsibility and vote too. In reaching these conclusions, I encourage us all to also find ways of listening to children and young people's views. I hope all our schools will have their own debates and mini-elections. But I also hope we will find ways of helping children and young people express their thoughts more publicly, so that those who vote can take these into consideration in making our voting decisions. Above all, we must pray. Pray for all taking part, including all those helping with the campaigning. That is hard work. Pray for those who will become our next MPs. Pray for the future government. Whatever the outcome, whether we feel elated or deflated, encouraged or fearful, we should pray for the new government to act wisely, humbly, and recognise that they serve under God. So, how might all of this connect to Waymark and the process which flows from it up to next year's November Synod? Well, we have to work from a vision too. The vision ultimately of God's kingdom, expressed at present as blessing our communities in Jesus' name for the transformation of us all. We have to identify and work with priorities. We cannot do everything. Indeed, it is probably right that both at diocesan and parish levels, we should do fewer things and do them better. We should invest in where we believe we can see real progress on the priorities. So as we reflect on all the input into Waymark, we have to discern just what God might be saying to us about our current three priorities of growth, children and young people, and poverty. Given the way the Children's and Youth Council's input was received and the comments already made, it certainly looks like we have to increase the part of that priority which is about listening to their voice and encouraging their leadership. But what about their encouragement and challenge, re-echoed this morning, to be much more proactive about the environment and climate change? Does that become a fourth priority? Or does it feed across the other three? Does it make us rethink about the framing of all of them? Discipleship and sharing our faith in word and deed remain at our heart. How are these best deepened in the future? These are the kind of questions with which we shall have to grapple in the coming months. Then what does the financial challenge facing us at parish and diocesan levels say to us about how we operate? It simply will not work for parishes to draw into themselves and see paying parish share as the last payment to be made, as if it is somehow doing the diocese a favour. There is no diocese over there somewhere. Collectively, we are the diocese. Nor can we, who have to make decisions on the part of the whole diocese, simply go on requesting more and spending down reserves when the message is clearly being given that there are difficulties in raising more. So let me be clear. Parish share is the main source of income for the diocese. Income from the church commissioners through the Low Income Communities Fund is the next most significant source. This is declining, though less so for us than for most dioceses. Rightly, the church commissioners are expecting us to genuinely use this income to support those parishes who have the populations with the lowest incomes. This means that many parishes who have effectively been supported from this source in the past will not be able to be supported in this way in the future. We also receive significant income from the Strategic Development Fund. This is effectively our income from the commissioners to invest significantly in different ways, and it doesn't appear in the budget because it comes in for these specific purposes and is used for those. For us, first, clergy training through the Missional Leadership for Growth programme. The church commissioners paid for Waymark Conference. Every last penny of its cost came from the Strategic Development Fund money, as part of recognising that Missional Leadership for Growth has been about how we're seeking to develop. Then SDF has given us money for resourcing churches, and we hope in future, from next year, communities of hope. The latter two face a very big challenge, as they have to become self-sustaining within a few years. SDF income is enabling us to undertake mission we would never have been able to consider otherwise. The third area of income is our own investments. We're seeking to use these to produce as good and steady an income as we possibly can. But as our primary income source, if parish share does not at least keep pace with inflation, then we will not be able to maintain the level of posts in parishes or support provided from our diocesan team. Any grouping of parishes or benefice that does not in total contribute somewhere around £50,000 per year is a net receiver of support from other sources. That is most of our parishes. We face a significant challenge. The first and second response must be prayer. Alongside all of this, those of us who have a teaching ministry in the church, clergy, readers, lay preachers, have to fulfill our responsibilities and teach clearly and regularly about giving. No clergy person can excuse themselves from that responsibility. It is not asking for your salary, it is encouraging discipleship. We must not shy away from talking about money at least as often as Jesus talked about it. And he talked about money more than almost anything else. All of us must look seriously at our levels of giving. I still take tithing, that is giving 10%, as a serious guide for where giving levels should begin. Not as a legalistic line, but as a guide, recognizing that actually all I have comes from God and that I am responsible before God for how I use all my income, not simply what I give. On this basis, someone with an annual income of, say, £15,000 a year after tax would be giving at least £1,500 per year. That is close to £30 per week. Even if half of this were given to the church, that is £15, we would be talking about increasing the number of parish staff significantly. Or let's go more simply. One less takeaway coffee each week from every person on the electoral rolls, and that cost placed in the giving instead would see everyone's average weekly giving increase by over £2 per head, this would more than resolve our current financial issues. I was told I should be blunt. I am trying to be blunt. But our calling is not to focus on money. Just as I do not believe allowing the Treasury and the economy to trump every policy matter in government, that's the biggest change this country needs, to stop the Treasury driving everything. Sorry, that's not in the script. I do not believe finance should dominate PCC or Bishops' Council debates. We must focus on our vision and our core priorities. We must heed first our calling to love God with all our being and to love our neighbours as ourselves. So how are we doing in worshipping God in ways that truly engage and inspire us? Is our weekly worship something we regard as so good that we want to invite others to share in it? And if it's not, why aren't we doing something about it? Are we truly welcoming as congregations? We all say we are, but do those from outside who come for baptisms or as inquisitive locals really feel welcomed in and that they matter more than our regular friends? Are we truly serving the children and young people of our parishes by engaging well with the local schools and colleges, by opening up our buildings for them to use, by engaging with local sports clubs and other activities? Are we effectively standing alongside the poorest and neediest? Yes, certainly by running great lunch clubs, supporting local food banks, engaging in visiting the lonely. We know we're doing all this. That's come out from the parish surveys. Being dementia friendly, being disabled friendly, welcoming and supporting asylum seekers and refugees. It's fabulous how much is actually happening. But also, are we speaking up for justice for the poor, standing against racism in all its forms, giving time and money to local and national charities, above all, praying for God's justice to be done and his kingdom to come? Over these next months, in developing a new plan on a page, through listening carefully to all the input from Waymark, and engaging in an ongoing conversation, we are praying for God's wisdom for the next years ahead. It would be very strange if a new plan on a page looked exactly the same as the current one. Equally, it would be very strange if it looked so different that connections between the two are not clear. So pray above all else for God's wisdom for us all through this process. And may we as churches shine as light in the world and offer an example of the kind of society we really want to be. I draw to a close. We are on a journey walking with Jesus. Our year of pilgrimage in 2020 is all about this, walking with God. I hope we will explore deeply together what it means to be a pilgrim people today here in the Northeast, learning from the past and present, stepping boldly into God's future. As we do so, let us seek to be those praying and working for the welfare of the communities in which we live as God's pilgrim people. For it is in the welfare of those communities that we will find our welfare. Let us step out together into God's promised future.